replicate exactly, do exactly what we've done. And
like this, like an ice cream cone.
Like an ice cream cone, okay. Cave art is a misleading title. It sounds like very prehistoric men with very little sense in their head of making art. It's nothing of the kind. If any of you have ever been to France and seen the cave art, you'll see that there's something very special about cave art made by people with a lot of sense in their head and very sensitive to art, and the very title seems is misleading. As a matter of fact, caveman is a misleading title because the people that lived in this time actually didn't live in the caves. Pretty much they only came there to paint their caves. Most of the time they lived in tents. They were hunter-gatherers. They went out to hunt the buffalo to get meat and food, and they came once in a while back to the caves to do their artwork. As for a word about art and science, people are interested in as a topic. The cave art answers the question, when did art begin? When did art begin? You might also ask the question, when will art end? For this, I invite you to walk up on 41 near the Ringling School and look at the graveyard of art there, if you recall it. To me, that's where art ends. Pretty severe statement, but yes. I stick by my word. However, cave art is at about 40,000 BC has been called by the archaeoastronomers the time when art began. What happened before then? Well, before then, you have a period of a Neanderthal man, who you may have heard of, who lived in southwestern France, actually lived all over Europe, and originated, they think, in Africa and Asia, and settled in 200,000 years ago. By 40,000 BC, he was replaced by CRO-MAGNUM, who is our people, that look just like us. And as I've told people, that if you dressed a CRO-MAGNUM man in a sports jacket and walked him down Main Street, you wouldn't tell the difference. Except he might be more cultured. He might be. Don't rule him out. So there are all kinds of mysteries relating to cave art. What were the Neanderthal people doing for 150,000 years? Why weren't they making art? And if they were, what was it? Well, apparently they did some etching on bones. They had some little things that they did, but nothing on the scale of the Lascaux and Chauvet paintings that I'm going to show you. So that's one of the mysteries of art and of when it all began. So this is Neanderthal art. And this is where the Neanderthal people lived, ranging all the way from the Altai in Siberia to Spain, in that blue area. Now, one of the points I'm making today has never been made in any course in art history that I've taken. That is, there's the study of prehistoric man, which we're talking about now, and we will also introduce the idea of, was there any civilization before 4000 BC? In other words, if you've studied in the colleges, they would have told you that civilization began in ancient Egypt, ancient Siberia, the Indus Valley, and the Yellow River Valley in China. And that before that, there was no civilization. But there was a growing body of very interesting archaeoastronomers who say, no, there was another civilization that preceded that. And that its exact beginnings are not known, but somewhere around 40,000 BC, the CRO-MAGNUM began. There were, in that period, another civilization. So you have then an interesting phenomenon. On the one hand, people are studying alternate history about other civilizations, and at the other hand, they are talking about cave art, but never in the same classroom. But they happened at the same time, if they happened at the same time, and I believe they did. So I believe you had a phenomenon around beginning of 40,000 BC to about 10,000 BC of two things going on at once: an advanced civilization scattered around the earth, and a civilization which we refer to as cave art. And did they then borrow from each other? Nobody's ever even asked the question. And yet I don't know that there's any evidence that they did, but I suspect that they did. Neanderthal man has for a long time been thought of as inferior to CRO-MAGNUM, that he was a different species, that he did not have the intelligence and so forth. However, we're going to believe that that's not the case, that he was not a separate species, that he was a different race perhaps, and that he had all the faculties of Homo sapien, present-day man. He was bigger, he had a bigger brain, he was able to speak. They could tell by examination of his larynx and his throat. They believed he could talk and had a language and so forth. But now, when we get in the caves, the question is, how do they know what the date was of the paintings in the caves? There's two ways they know. There is the way that art history deals with mainly, called carbon-14 dating. In other words, if you have organic matter and you painted with organic matter, it could be dated and was dated, and you could find out its date. The other way is that there was calcite forming in the caves, on the paintings, on the walls, and that calcite contained uranium, and uranium dating is the most up-to-date method. So they're pretty secure in the dating that they know. Unfortunately, Neanderthal's paintings don't go much beyond these handprints. You see, both Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal used this method where they put their hands against the wall and sprayed it between the fingers, and they made their handprints. But they were thinking, they were going beyond just their day-to-day living. They were concerned. And so in Spain, around 40,000 BC, they found these handprints on the caves. But there are other caves in the same area which they're not sure that Neanderthal didn't do. And they say these bisons may have been Neanderthal. I doubt it. They're too much like the Cro-Magnon paintings. At any rate, there's much that's not known, and one of them is, could they have done something of this nature? So Cro-Magnon art extends from 40,000 to 10,000 BC. Now, the cavemen lived in a period when there was still an ice age. The ice age lasted for a couple of 100,000 years and only broke up around 15,000 BC. But when they say ice age, that is not to say that the whole world was covered with ice. It means that the ice covered a good portion, but not all. And one portion it didn't cover was the area in southwest France and in Spain, and in the area where, in the map I showed you, where Neanderthal lived. So, and also in most of the United States. But, so that all things point to the fact that Neanderthal had a good life at Cro-Magnon, that things were in what they call the Dordogne area in southwest France, where there was lots of greenery, there were trees, there was savanna, there were plains, there were lots of animals to hunt, and it was not overpopulated. So in these, there's some remarkable things too about both these people. They overlapped in their time, but they didn't ever seem to fight. They don't have any records of any drawings or any bones or any weapons which shows that Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal fought each other, and that the Neanderthal, which died out about 40,000 BC, was defeated and crushed and that sort of thing. Now, his death is a mystery. The most likely explanation has been given that he died from some disease. Other things about this was very interesting too. When you look at the Lascaux in France, where this team in 1940 inspected the walls. On these walls, you don't find certain things. Like you don't find any trees. You don't find nature. You find animals. Why did they avoid showing nature in their paintings? And this was uniformly so. They don't show warfare. Does that mean for all these thousands of years, early man did not have warfare? It seems that that's the case. Very interesting. When did war begin? Well, it seems to begin with civilization, one of the blessings of civilization. These caves that concentrated in Spain and France were, Lascaux, which I visited several years ago in southwest France, was found by 4 teenagers who stumbled, I think their little dog found a little hole, and they went to look at it, and they found themselves inside these caves. And these caves are not just a room. Some of them went hundreds of feet deep into the inside. It was too damp and too cold and too occupied by bears who hibernated there in the winter for our people to have lived there permanently. Besides, they were on the move. They had to be on the move in order to go hunting. So, another problem is that when they first opened the Lascaux caves to people, they found that their presence actually harmed the paintings, because with all the humidity generated by the tourists, the paintings were disintegrating and a lot of damage was done. And so in order to prevent that from happening any further, they built a replica of the Lascaux caves, which is what tourists see now. And other caves too were built as replicas, in order to preserve them. So, these are some of the paintings. You notice that the animals are presented with great dignity and great admiration. And they are also considered to be on the level of art, to be very successful. Some people get carried away saying, well, this is the Sistine Chapel of the caveman, this sort of work. But whatever you may think of it, the very fact that it was handled so beautifully, showing animals in motion, showing them realistic but not quite naturalistic, recently researchers have examined a new facet of this whole thing. They asked, what in the world is the caveman doing, showing all these animals? Why is he doing this for thousands of years? And interesting too, another point is, even though they were done in the same place and sometimes over each other, they were not erased. They were not destroyed. In other words, one group of cavemen did not say, aha, these are my enemies and I'm going to destroy theirs and I'm going to put mine in their place. Nothing of the sort. They were all one culture over a long period, thousands of years, with respect for each other. So you can see how interesting Well, of course, they were interested in the animals because this is where the source of their food. But another idea that is being examined is that they had another great interest in the animals, and that is they were representing the heavens. They were representing the sky, and that they already had a concept long ago about the zodiac, the idea of the constellations in the heavens. As you may know, they're now considered to be 12 parts of the zodiac, and one of them is called Taurus, and Taurus is of the bull, and this seems to be, according to the new researchers, what the cave people were interested in describing on their walls of their caves. So what is the evidence for it? They say the evidence we have is, as I'll show you, there are some markings on some of these which are not clearly proof, but they say the actual orientation of the caves were done, just like the ones in Lascaux, to face west so they could catch the light of the winter solstice setting sun, and the sun would come in and hit the wall at the point where, at the wall where they have the best display of the bulls on exhibition. So that the early man was aware of astronomy and was not only doing artwork in his paintings, but he was concerned with science. A little aside at this point, science, as you know, there are two ways. This is my view in a nutshell. Science is concerned with knowledge. They're both concerned. Science and art are concerned with knowledge of the world. And science is concerned now principally with finding the laws of nature that govern the workings of the world. But broadly speaking, science is interested in the factual physics, the factual aspects of what we have to deal with here. So what is art? Does art have anything to do with knowledge? And in my view, art has quite a bit to do with knowledge. And that art is then what's left over. If science is dealing with the reality of the world, what hasn't it done that needs further examination? And the examination is that it is looking into man's relation to nature and a man's relation to himself, his attitudes and his beliefs, and of these relationships. So, if this is art, and this is evidently art, then the cave person is interested in these relationships with the animals, and he's also interested scientifically in a broad sense with the relation of animals, principally the bull, with the Taurus zodiac in the heavens. This is the Hall of the Bulls. The auroch is the name, is a type of bull. This was done about 18,000 BC, 15,000 BC here. And this is the hall that I just mentioned where this one researcher said the light of the solstice setting sun caught the wall and illuminated this scene. These are other drawings, always in motion, lovingly. They would also take advantage of the shape of the stone, so that if the walls of the cave had a certain protuberance, that the animal's body would conform to that. And they also showed some perspective. These are other scenes. And one researcher sees in this drawing that these are not simply 5 stags, 5 deer, but one deer in motion. And the deer is depicted in motion in 5 different scenes, but the same deer. The oldest friend oldest of the caves in France that they found is Chauvet. And this goes back to 38,000 BC, which is another 20,000 years earlier than the Lascaux cave. And here's the replica, 800 feet long cave. And these are scenes. Well, I see in these scenes from the Chauvet cave the same sophistication and the same ability as artists that I see in the 20,000 year later Lascaux caves. These are not amateur. It's very interesting to me that you don't find here a development from sketchy little drawings to sophisticated drawing. They seem to start at the top. They seem to be sophisticated from the beginning. And here I introduce a notion that is new, I believe. And that is, these people are living at a time which, if it is true that the alternative historians are telling us there was earlier civilization, then they are living at a time as hunter-gatherers, but in a world where there are also civilized societies. And that the influence from civilized societies on these hunter-gatherer cavemen artists makes it possible for them to start their sophistication earlier. This is also Chauvet. Horses, beautifully done. They used minerals that they got from the soil around them. They used brush, they had fur that they used sticks, they used their own fingers. These were their implements for painting. Now, who painted? Were the women painting? Now, very few of the researchers that have examined this, they've all assumed caveman. Well, naturally, the men painted and the women were busy elsewhere. But it would make more sense to assume that the women were the artists, because if the men were busy outdoors catching animals and the women were more sedentary, they would have more opportunity to be the artists. In any case, it's an open question. I think there's a certain power in this type of drawing where the not naturalism, but realism was depicted, and the power and the magnificence of the bison is depicted here. The scratches that you see have been attributed to bear scratches. The bear is hibernating for months at a time in the cave while the caveman is staying away, and he may have noticed something, but for whatever reason, he scratched the cave painting of the bison. In this picture, it has been attributed by some people, that little bird in the middle on the stick, and that these are astronomical attributions. Don't ask me. I find that hard to accept, but so it is meant to be. And there are rhinos of a different type, but rhinos in Chauvet. Here's a group. They had lions at this time.
Do they have horses?
Horses?
Some of them.
Did they have horses? Yes, they had horses. Is that the question?
Yes.
I want to point out. I want to point out that the interest in the heavens, if there have been, as we know, that there were catastrophes in history, in archaeology, So that the general idea that catastrophes in this earth occur only infrequently, so that really the only real catastrophe was 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs went extinct, and that would happen very, very rarely. But it seems to be the case that after the end of the last ice age, about 15,000 BC, there was a warming period, and then suddenly there was a return of the ice age around 13,000 BC, lasting to about 2,000 years. And it struck hard. And according to what I've been reading, what brought all this about? And what did these people do when all this was happening? Well, they were not in the area, as I pointed out, of the ice, covering of ice that was covering the northern parts of the world. They were in a safer area, but that they this is the light coming in. Here, now this is this shows you the deer up in the upper left-hand corner, and the dots that you see have been attributed to an accounting on the walls of phases of the moon, so that there are 13 dots indicating the visibility of the moon, and the square, the rectangle, when the moon is not visible, of the 29 phases of the moon, but that they were carefully using science as well as art as best they could to record on the walls the astronomy. And here again, there's a horse and what is thought to be a lunar calendar showing 29 phases of the moon by this Dr. Michael Rapidlook. And above the shoulder of this bull, you see those little dots, and they believe that this was a notice of the Pleiades, the stars in the sky. And why all this business of the concern about the heavens? Because if there had been catastrophe, and they had lived through it, and they were concerned that it would happen again, and that they had to know as much about the heavens as they could. And if you look up in the heavens, it all looks like a dome that shifts all together, except for the moon and the sun. But that there is one thing that's different, that's noticeably different all the time, is that when the sun rises, as it rises in the night, behind it is the stars, which are in a different phase of the zodiac, a little bit each time. Each time the sun rises, it rises with behind it a different part of the zodiac. So that over 26,000 years, the zodiac changes due to the wobble of the earth. And people then could have noted there's something going on up there, and that this is probably what's responsible for the disasters that are occurring here. And that it's important to look at the stars and to record these and to know it. Here's some more of the site dots. And in Spain, there's Altamira. This is in what they call the Cantabrian district in the northwest, in the Basque area of Spain. For some reason, their animals are more sedate than the French. But if this is really Altamira, this is remarkable. There's something extremely contemporary about this painting. And yet, it's attributed to the cavemen. So, what I want to point out is that there's a continuum of early civilization, which then somehow, even though there is a catastrophe that occurs about 13,000 BC, that the survivors continue the knowledge of this early civilization into contemporary civilization. And that the clue to places like India, the Indus Valley civilization, which is now in Pakistan, is this continuum of knowledge. So, in India, and all over, not just in France and Spain, there is this 30,000-year-old cave painting, which had been inhabited for 100,000 years. In Indonesia, there is the site of the oldest cave paintings with figurative drawings. This pig deer, 33,000 in Indonesia. And here, you can see the same handprints and the animals. Romania thought so well of contemporary Romania, the whole thing, that it made a stamp showing the bulls. And even in Argentina, there's the same sort of thing. Cueva de los Manos, Cave of the Hands, in Argentina. Apparently, this cave culture was worldwide. It was not just in one place, it was all over. And I believe that at that time, the civilization that was contemporary with cave art was also worldwide. And yet, like today, where we have advanced civilizations here in this country, we can have Bushmen living in Australia, and we can have Indians living in Brazil, the Amazon River Valley, so that it's quite possible for two levels of society to coexist at the same time. So, here is the Ice Age, a map of the Ice Age. That light blue showing the ice descending over Finland, Sweden, Norway, and leaving what France and Spain, you see, and Italy are relatively okay. The phenomenon that you may never have heard of, which I began to describe about the movement of the sun amongst the constellations, is called the precession of the equinoxes. In other words, the sun is moving through these zodiac, the 12 zodiac, and it's noticed on the earth that this is happening. And here you see is the zodiac, the middle is the earth, the sun showing on the left there, and right above the earth you see that's Taurus, and there's the ram to the right of it, and there is Pisces, which we're living in now, the fish, and the new one coming up on the right, Aquarius, the age of Aquarius, which is coming up very soon. Each one lasting about 2,300 years. And the man on the right in the blue t-shirt is the leader of the alternative historians, in my view, Graham Hancock. And his books, the #1 book is called Fingerprint of the Gods, and I have almost all his books, and I think it's very exciting, and you may never have been exposed to him in your college careers. But the man that was even more exciting, or was an alternative to the alternative, is Charles HAPGOOD, who died American who died in a automobile accident. And his view was that the Ice Age began, as has been attributed to it, by a comet striking the Arctic region and Canada with such force that it caused all types of earthquakes and tsunamis and nuclear winter type of, where the sun was concealed for long periods of time. And then, but Charles Hapgood asked, if this comet did this and struck the Earth, what else did it do? And he offers the following explanation. He says, not only did it cause all these terrible things to happen, but it also had an effect on the crust of the Earth. That is, the whole crust of the Earth moved. The whole crust slipped 2,000 miles, so that the Earth slipped in this hemisphere down towards the South Pole, moved up towards the North Pole in the other hemisphere, and that this is what completed the destruction and left it so much devastation in its wake. Mr. Hancock says this is nothing, this is nonsense, and doesn't believe it. So amongst the alternative historians, they have the disagreement. But Albert Einstein, well, this is a displacement of the Earth's outer shell over the inner body, occurred frequently during the history of the Earth. Such a displacement occurred at least 3 times in the Pleistocene, meaning the couple of 100,000-year cave ice age. But Einstein approves of that theory. Yeah. And here's the Earth layers. You see, if you look at a diagrammatic scheme of the Earth is about 8,000 miles in diameter. The crust is only 25 to 50 miles in thickness. The whole crust, oceans, ocean bed, and so forth. And as you know, the crust is not very stable even now, because we do have our earthquakes, we do have our tsunamis, and so it's possible for the whole thing to cut loose and move from time to time. At any rate, we know there was a flood, and we know it for many reasons. We know that the oceans did rise some 300 feet or so that in this picture, where you see the gray areas, this is the ocean rising along the coast of Asia, about China, and South America, and so forth. Here, you see the civilization, if there was one prior to our own, lasting till about 10,000 BC, it was on the coast, because they would travel and they would communicate with each other. It was not in one place, it was all over the world. And that would be most devastated. And so the white area that you see there was the area that was, and the ocean rose to cover it. And over on the left where it says Pakistan, that's where the Indus Valley is. And that in the Indus Valley, people from the previous civilization who survived, and people with their sons and daughters who survived, brought the blessings of a civilization to the Indus Valley. And Indus Valley, of the 4 civilizations that I mentioned, has the best reputation of being without war, just like the early CRO-MAGNUM man. They did not have war. They did not have institutions of hierarchy. They were a peaceful civilization until they were lost out. They thought it was because of the shift in the climate where the rivers dried up. The hardest thing perhaps to take of all these ideas is that with the displacement of the crust, that what happened to the center of the early civilization, the utopian center, what happened to it? And they say it moved down from the south of the Atlantic to become Australia. Now, if you have nothing else to sneer at, you can sneer at that, because it's so striking idea. But that the land that was the center of the earlier civilization, what we call now Atlantis, moved 2,000 miles down into a colder climate, became covered with ice and snow for miles, and one day, perhaps we'll find out when the ice and snow is melted enough, we'll be able to see evidence of this. That somewhat absurd idea answers the question that people who say, if you think there was an Atlantis, where is the record of it? Where are the pieces? Where are the parts? Why don't we find anything? And this explanation says because the center of it moved and became Australia. And there are other things that are pointed out too. Here's a woolly mammoth, which was found in Siberia. And they found that in its stomach, it had grass and flowers, buttercups. And they said, nowhere in Siberia do you have buttercups. So how did this woolly mammoth, who they dug up, where did that come from? And the explanation of the HAPGOOD, the idea of the crustal displacement, is that Siberia, which was 2,000 miles further south, that's when the mammoth lived there, when it was warmer. But when it moved up to Siberia, that's when it was found. So it was found with the buttercups in its stomach. And in places like Japan, there are some very strange underwater findings. So in a place called Yonaguni, on the coast of Japan, there are these huge megalithic blocks which look very much like parts of masonry construction. Conceivably, they could be just natural rocks in that shape, but it may not be the case. And there are all kinds of theories about Atlantis. Here's one called Santorini in the Mediterranean, that maybe that's where Atlantis was. And this is a concept of what it looked like. And mind you, all this is happening while still our caveman is doing his thing in the caves, if it's the case. Here are the ancient river civilizations. You can see the one, the Nile in red, the one, Mesopotamia, next to it, way over on the right, the Yellow River, and then down by India, the Indus Valley. And the idea of the that there was this movement of the crust would make some sense, because these areas now are in the temperate zone, stretching from Egypt to China. But then before 4000 BC, before, very earlier than that, 8,000, 10,000 BC, they were further south. And the movement of the crust brought them into a more temperate climate and allowed for the birth of civilization. Even if this is not true, the very idea of it is kind of breathtaking, because it offers you an explanation to big concepts. How did civilizations begin? Why did they begin in these places? Possible. Here the Indus Valley, or Upper Mohenjo-Daro. And notice, there are objects in the Indus Valley. These are two little 2-inch square medallions. Beautiful depictions of animals, and above it, a script that has never been deciphered, even to this day. But what I offer you here is the idea that the love and the artistry of the animal drawing is in line with the caveman artistry in Lascaux and Chauvet. This has often been cited as evidence that the Shiva, one of the leading Hindu gods, this was a statue of Shiva on one of these little medallion type things. And the elephant and the bull. And this enigmatic statue, which is only a couple of inches high, what does it mean? Nobody knows. But the artistry is high. And this torso, which matches, they say, the Greek ability to do their sculpture. This young girl. And coming out of the Indus Valley, this gold necklace. So the question of culture seems to go way back to the caveman times. Does not seem to be a question of evolution, which we attribute to science, but varies with the society that entertains the culture. And I find it interesting that here you could listen to political debates from left to right, Obama to whatever, and you won't find mention of the word culture. The word culture is forbidden somehow. Nobody mentions culture. And who will promote culture, on which side, and what will Clinton do for culture, or what will anybody do for culture? Nobody says. That's, to me, a very ominous type of situation. So I think what I'll do is leave you here with all these rambling statements, and I think you've got an idea of what the prehistoric artwork was like, caveman art. And so I'll just open it to questions, if you like. Thank you very much.
How old is that, supposedly?
Well, the Indus Valley went from about
And here you
Walk me through the tube.
models.
about 2500 BC to about 1000 AD. So it's in that period. It's much later than the cave paintings. Yes?
You say that they communicated with each other around.
Yes, I think so. That's my guess.
What did they use for transportation? How did they get where they were going?
What did they use?
For transportation.
Well, I believe that they had boats, that they went by boat, and that there was a maritime movement around the world, and which we don't know of now.
Have they found any boats?
No. It knocks a hole in the theory, doesn't it? But they haven't found hardly anything.
Thoroughly, yeah.
And if it weren't for these caves that last forever, we wouldn't know about cave art either, you know?
And they don't have pictures of human beings, they have only animal pictures. Have they depicted anything other than the animals?
Very little, very little. I can't, but later, some arches, you know, and some stick figures, but for thousands of years, just animals. Well, that's it. It's frustrating, but science does not know everything. If you have a grandson and you want to...
I know, but when does it start? When did they start doing this, the evolution of this research?
Well, this is, a lot of this is fairly recent, because they opened the Lascaux cave in 1920, you see. So they didn't even know about it.
So they're telling a story. They were actually telling a story because they don't have any scientific factual basis.
Well, we don't know any, they have evidence of various types.
Were the paintings all on the ceilings?
Yes, on the ceiling too. Yes.
That must have been
You don't show,
difficult.
but there's a lot of the paintings are on the ceiling.
And they don't know anything, do they know anything about the people?
About what?
About the people, do they know if they
Very
had...
little, very little. I don't know. There's a question of how sophisticated were they? How much did they know? What kind of language did they have? It's yet to be discovered. Okay, thank you all.
Yeah, yeah.